Hey guys, JC Smith here. I got a few minutes today. Just gonna take a look at this C8500 with that 3116E cat that has running problems. After thinking about this for quite a while, I think it's a fuel problem because it's either a fuel or a high pressure oil problem. Because when you're driving, when it started to act up, it acted like it was losing fuel. If you remember when I told you I tried to crank it back over and it wasn't smoking out the tailpipe, so it tells me it wasn't fueling. Whether the ECM didn't have power and wasn't telling the injectors to fire, or the injectors didn't have enough fuel in them to fire, to raise the needle off the seat to spray, or if the high pressure oil wasn't making enough high pressure to run the piston down on the fuel. One of those. So first thing I did was start with ECM. I went to the Ecm connectors here, and you have two. The top one on this is what's called the OEM connector. The top one on this is what goes to the engine. That has the crank sensor, cam sensor, the regulator on the back, the high pressure oil, the ICP sensor, the coolant temperature sensor, all that stuff. And then the other one is what's called the OEM, which means it comes out and it goes to it gets its battery positive, the switch power, all the grounds, and all the outputs to the cab that it would need, like oil pressure, temperature sender, let's see what else would be in there, check engine light, so on and so forth, everything that would need to go from the engine to the cab. So I found a general pinout for 40 pin, and I'm not sure it's right, because really the only way to get the right pinout for one of these is to take the engine serial number and call CAT. I only got a few minutes today. I'm just kind of in the middle of something else and got done, so I want to fiddle with this. So I checked the pins that are supposed to be. There's supposed to be 2 grounds, 1 battery, constant power, and 1 key switched positive. And they're in the right locations according to the pinout I had, and they were correct. So the next thing I did was cranked it over, and I took this is a high pressure rail set, high pressure oil rail, and there's a plug right there. So I removed that, and that's an O-ring seal plug. So I went and got an adapter, threaded in there, and then threaded my high pressure oil gauge in there. And cranking, I have just over 700, 715, 720 psi cranking. So that should be enough for it to fire. So then I went to the fuel, and I removed the return line, which I'll show you. So there's the return line off the tank. Now cranking, that should flow out a pretty decent stream, so watch this. I got nothing. So the next thing I did was I rechecked the filters, and I pulled both the filters off and made sure they were full, and they were. So then what I needed to see is, do I have air getting into the fuel system? So I go over here. This is where there's a port on the top of this filter in the fuel system. So I want to crank that and look for air. So let's do that real quick. Okay, now if you can see that there, let's see what we get. Okay. So now what you see is we have air in that port right there. So that means that somewhere between this pump and our fuel lines, we're sucking air. So let's see if I can get this here. Yeah, it's difficult. Sorry about this. I'm trying to get you a good angle you can see. Alright. Well, that was for nothing. Guess we should back up here. Okay. So the fuel lines come from the sending unit, that tank right there. They come over through here and over in this way. And you can see this one right here goes to that first filter. This comes out of that filter and it goes up to the back of the head. Now the one you see going like this is the return line, okay, which apparently, I'm guessing that's a check valve in there of some sort. I'm not sure, but it might be. But the one that's the supply is this standing up line right here. Well, the only other connection between what I just showed you is there's a little quick snap lock connector on that steel line that changes it to the nylon, just kind of like what you see on the return line right there. So what I'm going to do, because I think we're sucking air somewhere, and I think what's happening is it'll run, but it sucks enough air that eventually it's not enough diesel fuel pressure to fill the injectors. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back out here. I'll do this without making you sick. I'm going to take an old inner tube tire, an old inner tube around that filler neck right there and put a hose clamp on it, and then take the vent that comes off the sending unit and plug it, and we'll pressurize that tank. I'll hook the returns back up, of course, and plug that port up there, and then I'll pressurize the system and see if I have it leaking anywhere, because if you have a place that will suck air, if you pressurize that, we should see diesel fuel leaking somewhere. And that's where I'm going next, and we'll see if that's the dilemma, or if it's possibly, it could be, if it's not sucking air through one of those lines, which I gotta tell you, they all look pretty good, but I've seen them where they look good but still sucking air. But I guess the other thing could be is this has always been kind of damp. I mean, it doesn't look that old, but it also looks damp. It's possible this pump could be sucking air, I guess, through the backside. So every time that it pumps, it's sucking air. You wouldn't think that's the case, and I really don't think that's it. I think we got a problem somewhere else. I mean, it could be something as dumb as, one of these housings could be cracked. And, I think I mentioned in the first video about this thing that I think someone else was chasing this problem, because there's an awful lot of new parts here and there. I mean, we got new ICP sensors, we got a new regulator on the back, a new high pressure oil pump. It had new filters when I got it. They were cutting off the one fuel tank. So I think we're chasing a problem somebody else couldn't find. But I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this. I know I keep saying that, and here I am fooling with it again. But I've only spent about, half hour, 45 minutes messing around here and trying to find a plug. There it is. There's a plug for that port there for the fuel. Yeah. So next thing I need to do, like I said, is pressurize that fuel tank and see if we're leaking somewhere. And if it leaks somewhere, we fix the leak and then go on from there. If it's not leaking, I'm kind of at a loss at this particular moment. Oops. But we'll see. Anyways, I'm going to tighten this up. That's going to be it for now. Once I get the fuel tank set up, pressurized, I'll bring you back. So we'll see in a bit. Alright guys, I was going to bring you back and pressurize that tank, but something else has just come up I got to go take care of, so I'm gonna have to call it quits on this one. I'm gonna cut this video here, and that'd be a little update for you guys as far as what we're doing and where I'm at on this thing. But hopefully in the next day or so I'll get it either figured out or give up on it, one or the other. But I think we're getting close. I think we've narrowed it down to fuel. So if I pressurize that tank, one of two things: if it runs really well with the pressurized tank, that tells me that fuel pump isn't pumping, and where that air is coming from, I'd still have to find that. But regardless, we're getting close. Guys, okay, so the video you just watched, I felt like I needed to do a real recap here because I was doing the editing and I kind of felt like I left some stuff out. Alright, so where we're at with the truck is, the truck, when I got it running, it ran good, and it ran good for, I don't know, maybe a half an hour, and it felt like it ran out of fuel. Now, when I went to go restart it, it would crank, and no smoke. And typically, when you don't see any black smoke and you're cranking, typically what we're thinking is it is not fueling. Not necessarily it's not getting fuel, but for one of the three systems it takes to put fuel into the combustion chamber on the compression stroke aren't working. Something's not working. Alright, so the three systems are electric, fuel, actual diesel fuel, and high pressure oil. So the first thing I checked was the ECM. Okay, first check on the ECM is get in it, turn the key on, does the check engine light come on? Yes, it does. That right there is a pretty good indication that the ECM does have power and it can turn itself on when you put power to it. Okay, so we saw that was good. Next, we needed to check to make sure that the ECM knew that the engine was turning over, because if it doesn't think it's turning over, it's not going to fire the injectors. So we crank it over and we see the tach in the instrument cluster is moving, and as the battery slows down, you can see it's slowing down. So we're assuming, we hate to assume, but we're assuming the ECM knows that the crank sensors are giving inputs for a signal telling it is cranking. So we think that's working. So the next thing we want to look at is the high pressure oil. What happens here is the regular oil pump that lubes the engine, that pumps oil all through for the lubricant qualities, it supplies the high pressure oil pump, the Huey pump, with oil that typically about 25 psi, I think in this case, pumps it up to the Huey pump. The high pressure oil pump is what it is, and it pumps it up to about 500, low 500 psi's at cranking, about 700 at idle, up to about 3,500 psi, and that pressure is controlled by the ECM again. The ECM has a sensor on the head in that high pressure oil rail, and it can monitor what that pressure is, and then it controls that pressure by a regulator on the pump. Now that regulator is kind of a plunger type deal, and it allows so much oil to pass through based on what the ECM desires, what it wants. So it can move that and either discard the oil pressure or deadhead it, give it all, or whatever the case. I think rarely they ever deadhead, but anyways. So what I did next was I took the oil port out of the head in the high pressure rail, and I put my oil pressure gauge in there. It goes up to 4,000 psi. I think cranking we had, what was that? It was low 500s cranking. Okay, so we think that's okay. And when I quit cranking, it didn't drop off immediately. It slowly fell off. So that gave me a pretty good indication that we think the injector O-rings that oil pressure goes to are sealing well. And then the next thing is fuel. You have to have fuel in the injector in order for the high pressure oil to push on the piston to inject that fuel into the cylinder. That's where we came into trouble. When I pulled that return line off the back of that sending unit, I put it in that Gatorade bottle and I cranked it over, you saw we had very, very small amounts of fuel. We should have had a lot more fuel than that coming out. So the next thing I did was check the fuel filters, make sure they're both full and not plugged. So I pulled the fuel filters off. Both are full of diesel fuel, clear to the top. So This fuel system is what's called a draw system. On the back of the high pressure oil pump, you saw where I showed you the fuel pump there. That pump draws fuel and literally pulls it out of the passenger side tank, across the frame rail, into the first fuel filter, out of the filter, up to the pump, and then pushes it through the second filter and into the injectors. Okay? Now, in a draw system, it is very common to get a leak somewhere where it will suck air. Now, air is much easier for that pump to suck than diesel fuel. Diesel fuel is thicker, it's heavier, it's harder to pull. So every chance it gets to suck air through the line, it will for certain. So what we have to do is find out if it is sucking air, which as I showed you, I took that port out, you can see it pumping air into the cylinder. Now, I could go through and I could take every line apart and I could try and find where it is, or we can kind of eliminate all those variables by pressurizing the tank. When I pressurize that tank, it is no longer a pull system, it's a push system. So I put air pressure in that tank, I plug off the vent line, I'll put that return line back on, and when I pressurize it, it's going to push fuel up to the pump, through the filter, and into the injectors. Now, if I pressurize that, and it starts up, and it runs good, and no issues, okay, it sounds like a pretty good chance we found the problem. So, once we do that, also what I'm looking for is the fact that once I pressurize that tank, if there was anywhere that was sucking air, it should show up with diesel fuel leaking at that place where it was sucking air. At least that's the hopes. I've done this several times and it's usually worked. One of the mistakes I made early on messing with trucks was I had a truck that was very, very oily, very old, had a lot of aluminum fittings on it, and I pressure washed it because I wanted it clean. I chased down, that thing would run great once you got it running, but as soon as you parked it the next morning, it was just murder trying to get that thing started. It lost its prime. So this is where I come up with the idea to pressurize the system, and I've used it a lot since, and it typically works. I mean, you can find it that way pretty easy. So that's what we're going to do. That's where we're at with that. Hopefully tomorrow I'll get a chance to do that. If I do, I'll get it videoed and I'll share it with you guys. And hopefully I'm looking at some new camera and maybe some equipment to where I can set up cameras and you guys can actually watch the whole process going through. But the majority of the time when I'm working, I'm by myself, and quite honestly, I don't think to set this up ahead of time. It's typically I'm doing this and I think, oh geez, that'd probably be pretty interesting to record there. But anyways, so tomorrow, that's where we're headed. I'm going to work on that tomorrow, and I just want to give you guys a little update. Hopefully that was make things a little clearer than what the video was, because a lot of times what I'm thinking here and what comes out of here are two different things. So that's going to be it for the night. So hey guys, if you like what we're doing, give us these thumbs up. If you haven't already, please subscribe. Leave your comments at the bottom. I love to hear them, and we'll catch you on the next one. Thanks.